Hello and welcome to this week's presentation for Politics and Societies of Southeast Europe. Our topic for this week is education, but most of what you've read and most of what we'll be talking about in here is something narrower than education. It's about the ways in which history is taught and ways in which the teaching of history is bound up with questions of politics, is bound up with questions of identity. So there's a big focus on competing conceptions of so-called national history in the states of Southeast Europe. And this topic fits into at least two broad concepts. First of all, the context of education and the role of education in the region, what it is that education does socially. And second, ideological investments that are made by states in conceptions of history. But let's talk by saying something about education generally, because we could probably say that education becomes an issue mostly at the point when a larger number of people come to have access to it. And that has not always been the case. So if you want to talk about levels of education in terms of statistics, uh, we could talk about things like average number of years completed or percentage of population with university degrees. I want to go with some even more basic statistics, and that is literacy. Now, these figures here that you see on the slide, these are rates of literacy in states in the region in the period 2007-2011. That is fairly recently. This is United Nations data, and if you look at the value in the column on the far right side, what you'll see is that in just about every state in the region, the literacy rate is somewhere between 95% and 100%. That is to say that what you have is near universal literacy. So education is available at least to that level, and this is something that is a relatively new development. It is a development type of progress that was made over the course of the last century or so. In fact, the literacy rates in Southeast Europe are pretty well comparable to literacy rates in the rest of Europe. Here is a map of Europe by literacy rates, and you can see that the section in the somewhat darker orangish color have literacy rates over 99%. The ones in the lighter orangish color have literacy rates from 98 to 99%, and the ones in yellow below 98. Now, this map makes it appear as though we're talking about meaningful differences here. These are very small differences. In Southeast Europe, like in the rest of Europe, literacy is nearly universal. This has not been the case historically, neither in Southeast Europe nor in other parts of the world. Um, what uh, what I want to indicate here is that things like education, things like the rate of literacy, are not independent from political or other forces. In the period of empires, the process of education, particularly in Southeast Europe, but also in other parts of the world, was heavily dominated by religious institutions. In the time of formation of states, education was dominated by states and functioned as a shifting source of identity. In the period of developing national states in the first half of the 20th century, education was strongly tied to ideology, also in the communist period. But I want you to look for a moment at this chart here, showing rates of literacy in different parts of the world historically from the 15th century until now. And what you'll see in every one of these cases is that literacy begins in the period at a low level. Some of these states do not have measures before 1800. That is probably an effect of the fact that these things were not measured by then. But after that, there is a period where there is a very rapid rise to a point at which a clear majority of people are literate, followed by another slower rise with all states converging toward universal literacy. What is happening in this chart is that rates of education, rates of literacy correspond with processes of modernity and the formation of states. Formation of states require the development of markets, the development of bureaucracies, of a population trained to be able to operate those. So this is when literacy spreads. Every question that is tied to education is also at the same time a question about states and politics, because literacy is a product of, and education is a product of, the development of states and politics. It's instrumental in the formation of states, and states are instrumental in the formation and development of education. And that's the context against which we're going to be talking about everything that has to do with education in the region.